Mozart?
He was a genius, the most important musician. Half German, half Austrian, is that right? Wasn't he poisoned?
Who is the figure behind these cliches with whom people have endlessly been preoccupied for well over 200 years? Who is this man? What is the secret of his fame? These are questions to which not even an anniversary year with mega Mozart programs and countless new interpretations about the genius and child prodigy will be able to provide any satisfactory answers. And after the anniversary year, that we can be sure of, the myths will still be in the majority compared with what we really know.
I really don't know how Mozart as a person, because even you read it or the letters, you can get a little bit, but if you don't see the composer in person, you don't really know what he really like. But through music, somehow you get kind of the feelings, because when he composed it as a pianist or as making music, and then you kind of feel it when you play some pieces like I don't know Mozart, but here I think he's a little bit lonely and is kind of looking forward to meet someone. I'm not so sure.
What is it within the music that fascinates people from all sorts of different backgrounds?
Della tesa, ogni pervista, quando preparar, sei tu per piazza qualche ragazza, te con quella cerca menar, te con quella cerca menar, cerca menar, cerca menar, senza colore, la fantasia, chi il minuetto, chi la follia, chi la demanda, fai la ballare, chi il minuetto, fai la ballare, chi la follia, fai la ballare, chi la demanda, fai la ballare, e più tanto dall'altro canto, colpa quella movareggia, dopo mattina, donna decina, devi aumentar. Eine Melissa, donna decina, devi aumentar. Senza piazza, qualche ragazza, devi quella, Eine Melissa, dopo mattina, donna decina, devi aumentar. Senza colori, la fantasia, chi il minuetto, chi la follia, chi la demanda, fai la ballare. Eine Melissa, dopo mattina, donna decina, devi aumentar. Donna decina, devi aumentar.
Each image of Mozart so carefully created over the centuries bears an essential statement of its time, the favorite of the gods in the Romantic period, the psychoanalytical Mozart of the past century. People always knew who Wolfgang was.
I think it is arrogant to believe you know everything. And I think we need more humility when it comes to Mozart. Why is it that a chord by Mozart looks exactly the same on paper as one by Salieri? It sounds so much more magnificent. Why? That is a question I cannot answer.
Das ist eine Frage, die ich nicht beantworten kann.
An attempt to approach Mozart via musical games with numbers. Die Zauberflöte contains at least 10 catchy tunes. Don Giovanni probably over 5. Figaro certainly 8. If we then add the symphonies, we can conclude that Mozart composed a total of about 64.
Ogni donna cangiar di colore, ogni donna mi fa palpitare.
Chrysostomus Wolfgangus Theophilus Mozart was born on January the 27th, 1756, as the last child of Anna Maria and Leopold Mozart in Salzburg. It was a difficult birth. Already in the first months of his life, the child was described as being rather weak and vulnerable to frequent illness. He was not breastfed, instead he was given rice soup. It was not usual for babies to be breastfed, consequently they were undernourished, and this was the main reason for the high rate of infant mortality. The Mozart family. Who were they? They lived in what has become perhaps the most famous house in Austria, in the Getreidegasse in Salzburg. Leopold and Anna Mozart originally had 7 children, but only 2 survived. Mozart's sister, Maria Anna, was 5 years older than Wolfgang, and in the family she was known as Nanno. The mother was regarded as a great beauty, the father highly educated, Nanno extremely talented musically. Undoubtedly, it was a faultless family that little Wolfgang was born into. Yes. And the dog Pimple, the family's fox terrier. Allegedly, he was able to dance to the sound of the harpsichord. Sister Maria Anna's memories of her brother's childhood.
He loved his parents dearly, especially his father, and he composed a melody that he sang to them every day before he went to bed. His father had to stand him on a chair for this, and when this ritual was over, it could not be missed on any day, he kissed his father tenderly, and then calmly and contentedly went to bed. There is hardly anyone about whom we know so much as Mozart, and at the same time, we know absolutely nothing about him. His biography and his art are incompatible. They do not go together. In my opinion, the composer Mozart was never a child. That's how I see things. As for me, Mozart the composer is unearthly. I do not consider him to be light and joyful and refreshing, but I find him unearthly. It is something you just cannot conceive.
What does it mean never to have been a child, but also never to be a mature adult if one dies at the age of 35? Is it an intermediate world, inaccessible for us, where Mozart existed? Again, these are merely assumptions, but what else can one say about Mozart?
Ich fühle mich völlig unfähig, darüber zu sprechen.
I feel completely incapable of speaking about it. So much has been said and written about Mozart, and I think that no opinion can ever get close to a tiny drop of his way of conveying important life experiences in music.
Von dieser Art und Weise, also wesentliche Erlebnisse vom Leben in Musik zu bringen, aber mit
But with this strength, lightness, and the flow in the structure,
leichte und fließende
it is simply indescribable.
Ist unbeschreiblich, also.
Leopold Mozart to his friend Hagenau in Salzburg.
But we are honorable men who proclaim that in honor of their prince and their fatherland, a miracle was allowed by God to be born in Salzburg. I owe this act to Almighty God. Otherwise, I would be the most ungrateful creature.
Also, ich würde sagen, ich habe eine sehr,
well, I would say that I have great admiration and respect for his father, because even though he exploited the child, it made him a lot of money. This is the reason why, when he came back to Salzburg, after traveling to Italy, that he was able to move from his birth house to the lovely house on Markartplatz, where after all they had a small concert salon, the Dancing Masters Hall. So that brought him money. Yet, at the same time, in spite of everything, one has to say that this exploitation of the child Mozart was incredibly important for him. Without these journeys they took, Mozart would not have become the man he did. In other words, it was actually a wonderful relationship. This kind of love-hate relationship is the nicest kind.
Following Mozart's traces in southern Bavaria, in the region around the town of Augsburg, one comes across the possible origins of the name and the family. Mozart, Moziert, the people of the moor. Even nowadays in the Augsburg telephone directory, there are a few Mozarts, not excluding distant relatives of Father Leopold, who was born here. The father's family tree goes back to include members of the farming class, as well as a series of various craftsmen. Leopold's father was a bookbinder. His background was simple, but there was a strongly marked leaning towards the Catholicism of the South German area. Who was this Leopold Mozart? The biographers do not throw much light on him. Two contrasting views of the figure of Mozart's father are still valid nowadays. On the one hand, the monster who mercilessly exploited his children to earn money, and on the other, the great, enlightened, Jesuit, educated teacher, without whom the son would never have been able to become the man he did. Let us concern ourselves with this image of Leopold. He attended the Jesuit school in Augsburg for 12 years, and this made a lasting impression on him for the rest of his life. It also had an equally powerful and positive influence on the way he brought up his two children. An all-round education of the heart, of the emotions, and of the mind are the essential characteristics of a Jesuit upbringing. This also had an influence on the violin tutor that Leopold Mozart published in 1756 in Salzburg, which renowned teachers still regard not only as indispensable, but also unsurpassed standard work of violin teaching.
Obere Bogenhälfte. Spielen wir weiter, die nächste Stelle. Ja, Acht geben, dass der Ton kommt. Nicht zu leise.
It is not to be taken for granted that teaching is still, of course, based on this tutor in Leopold Mozart's hometown, not for sentimental reasons, but from conviction.
And then he says, fundamental principles of violin playing. We violinists understand that. Fundamental in the sense of all-embracing. It contains everything from the simplest beginnings to the most complicated technique. Actually, the only thing that is missing is the final blow to Paganini. It is fundamental in terms of craft. But at that time, fundamental was a concept that also meant well-founded, academically founded, and philosophically founded. And again with education, well-founded with an all-embracing education. His aim was to train musicians by means of this violin tutelage in such a way that they were not only good violinists, but so that they were good all-round musicians with good taste. And he says, truth and purity in music have to be recognized with reason and feeling.
Und jetzt dramatisch. Und Kompromiss ist zu Ende.
Shit in bed and make a noise.
Coarse words spoken by Anna Maria Mozart need Pertl to her husband Leopold. The phrase tells us more about the widespread enjoyment of humor related to bodily functions than about Mozart's mother. She was born in 1720 in St. Gilgen am Wolfgangsee, near to Salzburg. She spent an uneventful childhood and youth there as the daughter of the local resident court administrator. Music and art were not really important in her life until she met Leopold Mozart in Salzburg and married him. Games with the subjunctive. What would have happened if Leopold Mozart had not moved to Salzburg and met the attractive Anna Maria Pertl? And what would have happened if Leopold had taken up a theological profession after all, and if he had not been a musician and composer in the service of Sigismund von Schrattenbach, the Prince Archbishop of Salzburg? What would have happened if the Prince Archbishop had not been so well disposed and benevolent towards the Mozart family? And what would have happened if he had not so generously supported the extended trips abroad of the child prodigy and his family right across Europe?
Dearest Mama, my heart is full of joy from sheer pleasure because I am so happy on this journey, because it is so warm in the coach, and because our coach driver is a gallant fellow.
Mozart's journey as a child prodigy through Europe can only be described as concert business. The trips were excellently planned and organized by Father Leopold, thanks to a well-organized network of the clergy and nobility right across Europe. At first, both child prodigies, Nanl and little Wolfgang, performed something like a circus attraction to benevolent and frequently generous audiences between Vienna and London, Naples and Frankfurt. Nevertheless, Mozart was not the only child to travel. Documents from the period report about highly talented musical children who traveled with their fathers or mothers on concert tours throughout Europe. They did not attend school. The highly talented children were taught during the long coach rides, like Wolfgang and Nanl, by their father.
It is not really right to go in search of talent in kindergartens and schools, but this is exactly what we are accustomed to doing. In other words, the children are being prepared for something that society assumes for them. This is the central problem, I think. Instead of trying, and the Finnish school system is a great exception, to filter out talent, because every person has talents. There are no people without talent, and there are many who are gifted. We simply have to recognize it. Instead of properly encouraging them, we try to make everyone the same, and if possible, to fit into a mold where talent doesn't mean anything. That is the school. That is why I claim it was perhaps a great stroke of fortune that Mozart did not go to school for a single day. Perhaps going to school would have ruined his talent.
Child prodigies are not exclusively a fascinating feature of the 18th century. The highly talented child as an object to show off is a fixed component of present-day sensationalist society. But as it was in Mozart's day, what is still true nowadays is that first the personality has to be there and an extraordinary talent before special abilities can develop.
The first Mozart I think I learned is this. And then, and now of course the magic flute. This is the two, I think, the earliest impression for me about Mozart, and I just love it from right away, because I played lots of Mozart sonata when I was a kid, and obviously I played not very good, just kids playing. But I just really love it, all the melodies. That time, when I was a kid, I just loved the melodies.
One of the essential mysteries of Mozart's music, the apparent simplicity that makes it possible for almost anyone who's interested in music to make an equally simple beginning, either as a listener or making music themselves. At some point, the paths divide, and even the very great names, either conductors or pianists, when talking about interpreting his compositions, always speak of a lifelong approach without ever arriving.
La serie ópera se complace en presentar Aida de Giuseppe Verdi, orquesta y coro del Teatro de la Scala de Milán, dirigidos por Riccardo Caili, puesta en escena de Franco Zeffirelli, jueves, 17 horas. Los padres esperan conocer al prometido de su hermosa hija, pero ¿qué sucede cuando se dan cuenta que él es negro?
Take a little and let your poor
16.9 proyecta ¿Sabes quién viene a cenar? Con Spencer Tracy y Katharine Hepburn, viernes 23 horas.
The Mozart family approached the British Isles in April 1764. Crossing the Channel was terrible for them, and they were all seasick. When they arrived in London, the Mozart family had already been travelling for 11 months.
Miss Mozart, 11 years old, and Master Mozart, 7 years old. Natural prodigies take the opportunity of performing the greatest miracle in public that mankind has ever known. Everyone will be astonished to hear such a young child play the harpsichord to such perfection.
These rather questionable concert announcements were followed by concerts performed by the child prodigies before the King and Queen of England. The subsequent performances made Leopold Mozart a rich man.
To everyone's amazement, there were only a few hundred in the audience, but the most eminent persons in the whole of London and the first families of England. I cannot say yet whether I will be left with 100 guineas profit, but it is certainly not less than 90.
Nowadays, the house in Soho can still be seen, where every day between 12 noon and 2 p.m, people paid an entrance fee to admire the two child prodigies. Journeys to Italy.
The manual or the keyboard of the piano will be completely concealed by a cloth, and the boy will play just as well on the cloth as if he could see the keyboard. Furthermore, he will be able to name precisely all the notes that one can see and hear individually or in chords on the piano, or on all imaginable instruments, bells, glasses, and clocks.
The first journey to Italy between December 1769 and March 1771. Triumphant performances by Wolfgang in Verona, Milan, Bologna, Florence, Rome, and Naples. Highly acclaimed public performances alternated with private concerts in the palaces of the high nobility and before the highest circles of the clergy. Whereas the Mozarts were fascinated in London by the progressive street lighting, never seen before, Naples meant for them the encounter with a completely exotic world. Away from the highly cultivated Italian opera culture, the court of the Neapolitan king, completely foreign sounds could be heard here. And what child at this time had ever stood before an erupting volcano?
We also saw Vesuvius. Today, Vesuvius was completely covered in smoke. Naples is beautiful, but there are just as many beggars as in Vienna and Paris. And as regards the impudence of the beggars, I have the feeling that Naples is worse than London, because here the beggars have their gang leaders, who get 25 silver ducats a month to guarantee a certain kind of order. I have found out that there will probably not be a performance of the opera by Jomelli. We saw the king and queen during a mass in the chapel near the palace.
The distinctions and awards given to Mozart in Italy were the attempt to pay the highest possible tribute to an absolutely inexplicable phenomenon in the form of a child. How can it otherwise be explained that a 14-year-old boy could also become a member of the famous Philharmonia Academia in Bologna? How is it otherwise to be understood that in the same year he was received by Pope Clement XIV and appointed by him Knight of the Golden Spur? This was an honor that fellow musician Christoph Willibald Gluck had similarly received a short while beforehand. Despite all the honors, praise, and a lot of money, Leopold began to get worried. The source of income from the child prodigy threatened to dry up. Mozart was only 14 when he was made a knight, but his appearance did not allow him to be sold any longer as a child. The new aim, Wolfgang as a genius composer. At the age of 14, he received his first major opera commission, Mitridate. 2 years later, in Milan, another commission, Lucio Silla, the first truly incomparable stage work by Mozart, composed under such difficult conditions as could hardly be comprehended by composers of the Romantic period, and even nowadays.
Back then there was a huge difference, the feeling of being a genius. That a genius sits on a cloud of incense and then waits for inspiration and says, I cannot compose. I need the mood of a thunderstorm brewing to have inspiration. I have really heard composers say such things. Mozart strictly separated his private life from his moods and his professional life. Shortly after his mother died, he was able to write very cheerful music. Not long after his father died, he wrote the Musikalischer Spaß, a musical joke, and he composed very sad and really tragic music when he was in a cheerful mood. In other words, his life and his work are two completely separate things. He was extremely professional.
September 1777, Wolfgang Mozart and his mother set off on the journey which was to fill many pages of all Mozart biographies. For a long time, Mozart had been unsettled in Salzburg. The previous years had been characterized by several unsuccessful attempts by father and son Mozart to find an appointment at one of the foreign princely courts. The final destination of the journey was to be Paris. However, they stayed much longer than planned in Mannheim, one of the most important centers of music at that time in Europe and a meeting place for all renowned composers and leading musicians. The reason was to be found in the excellent orchestra of the Elector Karl Theodor of the Pfalz. The development of musical dynamics, or to put it more simply, the invention of the crescendo, the increase in the sound of the music, took place during these years in the mid-18th century within this Mannheim orchestra.
After Mannheim, it was more or less impossible to continue to compose as in the Baroque style. If we look at it in a negative way, it was rather like a poison, something that had to have a lasting effect, like a drug. For instance, you begin to play a passage very softly, but it is composed in such a way that you have to do it like this. Then for 20 bars, let's say 10 seconds, 20 seconds, the volume of the crescendo increases. And if it is composed with harmony, it can be overwhelming. You cannot play it any other way. You cannot say, let's play this piece softly now, because it is composed like that. That is a part of the composition. And the deadly bacteria are there to a certain extent, because every time it is played anew, it demands that the next time is even greater. This introduction of dynamics led to the crescendo having an increasing volume. For centuries beforehand, this had not been necessary, up to the threshold of pain. That is the stopping point, or where a loss of hearing begins. Mozart will go to Mannheim, and come what may, I cannot get it out of my head. The Elector will keep him,
prophesied Countess Londrin in Salzburg. An appointment at the court of the Elector Karl Theodor of the Pfalz would have been what Mozart wished for. The musicians in Mannheim were paid extremely well. For instance, the concertmaster received 1,400 florins, the court composer Ignaz Holzbauer 3,000. Even nowadays, this would correspond to about 75,000 euros a year.
It could really make your mouth water,
wrote Anna Maria Mozart to Leopold about the fees for musicians. She went on to write,
everything happens quite slowly here. We have to bide our time and be content that he has not given a negative answer.
Even though a personal meeting took place between the Elector and Mozart in a pleasant atmosphere, the Elector decided in December 1777 against offering Mozart an appointment. This marked the beginning of a whole series of unfortunate events. One of Mozart's truly great secrets is revealed in this situation in Mannheim. Mozart reacts to enormous blows of fate, such as professional setbacks and so on, with tremendous creativity. At the beginning of 1778, while still in Mannheim, he fell seriously in love. Love and Mozart, an inseparable entity in his operas. Don Giovanni, Dorabella, Cherubino, Despina, Pamina, the Countess, Figaro, Donna Anna, Papageno, Fiordaligi. The list could go on. The great Da Ponte operas in particular, what are they all about? About love and eroticism, of course.
It is difficult to say, because unfortunately no one knows Mozart. But if we study all the letters he wrote, and all the works and research carried out about his life and oeuvre, then one could think that he was someone who was very much in love, and indeed for whom love was the most important thing in life.
But was Mozart a person who experienced fulfilled love, or was he merely a prisoner of his imagination? The letters contain some answers. Which letters are meant? The famous, or rather infamous, letters to Maria Anna Fechler-Mozart from Augsburg, Mozart's cousin? Generations of Mozart researchers and psychologists were shocked and fascinated by surprising obscenity to be found in the letters. Why should he not have had any erotic ideas? Why should he not have experienced this to the full? A society whose day-to-day life was strictly regulated by moral dogma of Catholicism tried to find possibilities of liberation, even in the sexual sphere. Various rather risque games were played to increase desire, at least. One of these games included the measuring of young ladies' calves. The annual carnival season offered the nobility and higher middle classes additional opportunities and suitable surroundings for the greatest possible anonymity. Several compositions, including some of the most excellent concert arias in music literature, are what remains of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart's confessions of love to his great flame in Mannheim, the 16-year-old singer Aloysia Weber. Biographers dig deep into the realm of sentimentality when they try to describe and analyze the state of his mind.
His heart was excessively full of feelings he could not express. He was intoxicated by the dizziness of the exciting and at the same time frightening feeling of freedom.
And what sort of effect must Aloysia's beautiful voice have had on poor young Wolfgang?
Via the vegetative nervous system, acoustic impressions can not only change the heartbeat, but the breathing and the function of the sexual organs can also be directly influenced. Mozart was particularly sensitive in this sphere.
Salzburg asserted his authority and put an end to the naively euphoric courtship of his lovesick son. Leopold knew about the rather dubious Weber family, and he wanted to protect his son. Mozart had written to him,
"I am so very fond of this poor family that I wish for nothing more than for me to make them happy. Perhaps I can do so. We could go to Italy. In Verona, I would like to write the opera for 50 zecchini only, so that she can be famous. I think we will go to Switzerland, perhaps even to Holland."
There was absolutely no doubt about Father Leopold's answer.
"Off with you to Paris."
Das ist einfach diese Gluckensorge, die halt.
This is simply the joy and anxiety that responsible fathers have. In the family relationship was an element of tantalization that he had to overcome. He had to be able to stand up for himself, even to his parents, in every case. Mozart did that.
Das macht Mozart. Das macht Mozart. Wir wissen viel weniger über was die Mutter.
We know far less about what his mother thought about it. I presume that Mozart's mother worried less, because for her it was not so important that Mozart had a world career. For her, it would have been important for him to be happy, and having a family and a happy existence. His father had a different point of view.
Für den Vater war das eine etwas andere Sichtweise.
The journey to Paris against the will of both travelers took place under a bad omen. Mozart's mother could not speak French. Long journeys were physical torture for her. Mozart, in any case, only visited Paris from a sense of fulfilling his duty. Helpful friends were still to be found in Paris, and they arranged contacts. Nevertheless, the great breakthrough Mozart was longing for, and the desire to bask in glorious recognition, did not come about on this journey. There are several reasons for this.
If you had asked an Italian what he thought about French music, he would have said that it is not music at all, only form. It is rather like a boxwood tree that is not allowed to grow, but has to be cut in geometric forms. That is an example of French music. And if you had asked a Frenchman what he thought about Italian music, he would have said, that is not music, that is chaos. The supporters of Gluck and the supporters of Piccini used to beat each other up. They simply could not talk to one another. Mozart was neither a supporter of Gluck nor of Piccini. He was simply Mozart. If only the confounded French language were not so damn difficult to set to music. And the singers, they don't sing but scream and shout at the tops of their voices from their nose and throats.
Mozart and Paris.
Das Blickfeld.
The way Paris regards Mozart is still comparable to the view they had of him in 1778. Let's say that Mozart is preferably seen as the child prodigy invited to Versailles. His genius was felt only very rarely.
Salzburg. Und für Wien sieht man am liebsten als das Wunderkind, das in Versailles eingeladen ist.
I have to ask whether this is not only true of Salzburg and Vienna. The question is raised whether Paris really comes off so much worse than Vienna.
Da so viel ungünstiger abschneidet als Wien, würde ich sagen.
Köchel number 297, the Paris Symphony, was the only real great success in Paris. The health of Mozart's mother, who was already ailing, seriously deteriorated due to the wretched living conditions in Paris. Several cries for help written in letters to her dear husband convey a vivid impression of what she must have been going through.
As regards my lifestyle, it is not at all pleasant. I sit alone all day long in a room as if I were under arrest, and it is so dark, but looks onto a little courtyard, and the whole day I cannot see the sun, and I have no idea what the weather is like. If I really struggle and some light comes in, I can do a little embroidery.
In June 1778, Anna Maria fell seriously ill. She herself undertook some bloodletting, but this did not bring about the desired improvement. On June 26th, a doctor informed the son that she will not survive the coming night. Excerpt from the church register of the Church of St. Eustace.
On July 4th, Marie Anna Parte, 57 years old wife of Leopold Mozart, conductor in Salzburg, Bavaria, who died yesterday in the Rue du Groschnee, was buried in the cemetery of St. Eustache in the presence of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, her son.
Wolfgang did not inform his father about the death of his mother until July the 9th.
My dear father, I hope you are prepared to receive the saddest and most painful news with steadfastness.
The escape from Salzburg was a failure. Mozart had to return home. He left Paris in September. Despite being very hard up financially, he turned down a position as organist in Versailles. He'd achieved none of his aims. His mother had died and been buried in Paris. What Mozart took away with him were not really any major commissions, but instead some huge debts, which Leopold had to pay off over the coming years. However, Salzburg and the return to his father was not Mozart's aim, but he wanted to go back to Mannheim and to Aloysia Weber.
Dearest friend, my soul is troubled, and it will not be at peace until I have the consolation of being certain that you are given the justice you deserve. However, my situation and my condition will not really be happy until the day when I have the greatest pleasure of seeing you again and to embrace you with all of my heart. That is all I hope for and desire.
Bye.